When Chris said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," he stated a great imperative without which life would be impossible. Love is life, while hatred is death. According to Gandhiji, love and non-violence are synonymous terms. Non-violence is a term negative only in appearance, but it has real positive meaning. Non-violence represents the positive aspect of life. Violence represents the negative aspect of life. Non-violence is constructive. Violence is destructive. Non-violence is not only human but also godly, divine. Violence is just the opposite. Violence is untruth since it negates life. Non-violence is truth because it aims at preservation of life. Man must practice non-violence because it is in accord with the scheme of the Creator, and abjure violence because it is inimical to creation itself. Non-violence is the central principle of all religions. The basic tenet of every religion is love, which means non-violence. Gandhiji was so much against violence that he would not recommend its use even for such a noble cause as the achievement of freedom of the country. He would not use violence even against those who had enslaved India for centuries. It's a sad commentary indeed on our faith in Gandhism that we feel no qualms of conscience in razing to the ground the edifice of non-violence which Buddha, Vardhaman Mahavir, and Gandhiji erected for us. For little benefits, we indulge in violence. We witness a lot of violence in elections. Most politicians, from lower level to the higher one, tend to achieve their end through violence. Recently, elections to legislative assemblies of some states and union territories were held. In one of the states, elections were marred by violence. Even in the presence of paramilitary forces, acts of violence were perpetrated without any concern for electoral propriety. Violence was let loose even after the declaration of results. This must not have happened. The sanctity of our electoral process is violated by these acts of violence. Even at the lower level, say the panchayati elections, violence was resorted to by some elements. Recently, there have been many cases where violence was freely resorted to. Our Constitution allows peaceful demonstrations and protests to express dissent against governmental policies. But the violence is never allowed to be resorted. There was a long spell of protests and demonstrations against the citizenship, that is, the Amendment Act 2019 CAA. No problem. But later on, violence was let loose in some parts of Delhi in an organized way in which hundreds of lives were lost and the property worth hundreds of crores of rupees was consigned to the flames. The greatest irony is that many high profile politicians were involved in this orgy of violence. This year, on January 26, 2021, the sacred ramparts of the Red Fort were defiled and desecrated. National flag was dishonored. The unruly mob carried out destruction of national property to the will. Thanks to the restraint exercised by security forces, firing was not resorted to, and therefore casualties could not occur. Was this the way the farmers to get their demands fulfilled? Unfortunately, the hooligans were not the real farmers. The perpetrators of violence were a group of disgruntled people against the policies of the government. The irony is that some farmer leaders came out in defense of these people and tried to pressure the government not to take legal action against them. Earlier, there was an all India agitation by our Dalit brethren demonstrating peacefully is legally justified, but law doesn't allow anybody to take law into their own hands, to resort to loot, argon, and murder in the name of agitation. Such events have become a normal way in India, which put a question mark against our democratic setup. Despite having achieved independence 75 years back and having practiced democracy for so long, we have not yet been able to become a mature democracy. There is no room for violence in democracy. Violence is negation of democracy. Such events are very few and far between in mature democracies, especially Britain, where demonstrations and protests against government policies do take place, but resort to violence is rare. Democracy needs a sense of proportion, genuine concern for one's responsibility towards the nation, and an enlightened approach to matters that naturally arise in vibrant democracy. We have perhaps not yet generated that sense, which is the need of the hour. Things stand even worse confounded when we find that those who resort to violence don't get due punishment. Our judicial system works alarmingly slow, and the wrongdoers more often than not go scot free. Justice delayed is justice denied. There must be a time limit for the disposal of cases against those who indulge in violent activities. Perhaps it is not possible to banish violence altogether from the society, but it can certainly be controlled and minimized. The law of the land must be made more effective. The so called leaders who incite people to violence in order to subconcern their selfish political motives should be rejected and discarded by the society. There is a need for a peaceful society and the social revolution which should aim at the secularization of the society in the genuine and the truest sense of the term, so as to minimize the chances of social tensions generated by communal and narrow religious feelings. The law to deal with violence should be made more stringent. Even the setting up of special courts for different types of violent activities may be expedited. And above all, imparting of moral education and education in true citizenship should be given top priority. It is gratifying to note that in our new education policy 2020, much attention and importance have been accorded to this aspect of education of our citizens.